On this channel, I've replaced and upgraded many LCDs for various consoles, from the original Game Boy to the Sega Nomad and the Atari Lynx, on a quest to give these old consoles new life. There is one console, however, that always intimidated me when it came to upgrading the LCD, and that is the Sega Game Gear. The amount of modification required to get a modern LCD display to work on the Game Gear is overwhelming to say the least. Regardless, I have decided to tackle this challenge with the hopes of emerging triumphant. Let's get right into it. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. Today we're going to take a look at the LCD upgrade kit for the Sega Game Gear from our friend McWill. I'm both excited and terrified to do this installation as it will prove to be the most complex LCD kit I've installed on this channel. This mod is by no means for a beginner. One should be familiar and experienced with soldering before attempting this mod, as it will require the removal of small, delicate surface-mounted components, as well as very fine soldering onto very small pads. So definitely exercise caution when attempting this mod. Great, so I'll be doing this mod on this particular Game Gear. If you remember, in a prior episode, we were able to repair this Game Gear by replacing all the electrolytic capacitors with brand new ceramic ones. Unfortunately, the console suffers from a damaged LCD, which we found out after replacing the capacitors. But that makes this the perfect candidate for doing the McWill LCD mod. If you want to see how to replace the capacitors on a Game Gear with a really awesome ceramic capacitor kit from RetroSix, check out my Halloween episode on the subject by clicking on the card at the top of your screen or in the link in the description below. It is highly recommended to replace the capacitors on your Game Gear prior to doing the McWill LCD mod. Also, if you recall, this Game Gear was sent to the channel by my friend Matthew Macheski, who actually composed the intro song to my Retro Renew series. Once this Game Gear is all fixed up and working with this McWill upgrade, I'm going to send it back his way. Another disclaimer I want you to be aware of is that there are two types of motherboards that the Game Gear came with. Depending on which one you have, your installation instructions may differ slightly. The Game Gear that I'll be demonstrating this mod in is a 2 ASIC model. The single ASIC motherboard will have slightly different instructions, and from the looks of it, appears to be slightly more complex since you'll need to solder a few tiny 0-ohm resistors. Luckily, the McWill kit will work with both the single and 2 ASIC model Game Gears and comes with all the necessary components to do this mod on either motherboard. Speaking of components, let's go over the contents of the kit. First, we have the LCD driver board. This is what makes everything work. It's connected to a modern TFT display, which will no doubt look absolutely amazing once we're done with the install. Next, we have a set of 4 0-ohm resistors. I will not be using these for my particular install since the motherboard I'm using is a 2 ASIC model. However, if you have a single ASIC motherboard, you will need to use these included resistors. The kit also comes with an IDE cable, which should come in handy for all the connections we'll need to make. And the last item in the kit is the VGA connector. The McWill LCD mod has the option to add VGA out to an external monitor. This is something that I won't be doing in this video, but it's nice that it's included with the kit. Great, so that's the contents of the McWill LCD kit. But we're not done yet. We're going to really fix up this Game Gear by swapping in an aftermarket shell from the folks over at RetroSix. This shell is absolutely fantastic. The quality of the plastic is great, and I think the green color is going to really look awesome. The shell comes with all the necessary battery contacts that are already pre-wired, which is very handy. Also, it comes with brand new screws as well as an expansion port cover. And on top of it all, it includes a pre-trimmed RF shield, so we don't need to cut our existing one in order to do the McWill mod. That is super convenient. I'll also be swapping in brand new buttons and a speaker, both of which are from RetroSix. When we're through with this Game Gear, it'll be better than new. I have to say, the shell and buttons are absolutely fantastic upon initial inspection, and I've been excited for them ever since they were announced. I think these are deserving of their own video review, so if that's something you're interested in seeing, let me know in the comments section below. Now, the new McWill LCD module is quite a bit thinner than the old LCD. This is going to cause a gap between the LCD itself and the front shell housing, which may lead to some dust accumulation on the new LCD. To fix this, I printed a spacer to put in between the LCD and the front shell housing, which should create a good seal and prevent dust from getting onto the LCD. Alright, we got a lot of work to do on this Game Gear, so without any further ado, let's get right into it. To get started, let's open up the Game Gear console to get to the motherboard. I go over the disassembly in detail in my USB-C Game Gear mod video, so be sure to check that out. I'll put a link to it in the description below. With the motherboard out, we're going to start by removing all the necessary components, most of which are in this region here. We're going to start by removing the 9 resistors. While removing resistor R38, I accidentally created a small solder bridge. To remove this, apply some flux to the area and then gently run your soldering iron over it, and this will easily remove the bridge. After removing the 9 resistors, we now need to remove some transistors, starting with Q6. This proved to be difficult, and I accidentally removed the neighboring capacitor in the process and also melted the brightness dial a bit. You really need to be careful in this cramped area. Once Q6 was removed, I cleaned up the area with some flux and a bit of heat, and then soldered capacitor C34 back into place. You really need to take your time while removing these components. Moving on to the other side of the board, remove transistor Q3 and Q4. The instructions also said to remove Q2, but my unit actually didn't have a Q2 transistor soldered onto the motherboard, which I found quite strange. Now we need to remove the coil labeled L2. And then these 2 blue colored capacitors labeled C32 and C33. Next, peel off the tape securing the LCD ribbon cable. Then unscrew the LCD from the motherboard. Add a little bit of flux to the exposed contacts and then quickly heat the area while peeling the ribbon cable away until it is fully removed. Be very careful while doing this step, as we need to ensure we do not lift any of the pads. This is what the area should look like after it has been cleaned up. Now let's remove the CFL lamp by desoldering it from the motherboard. It should come off along with the rear reflector. Next, desolder these two fuses. Now that we removed all the necessary components, we need to make sure the Game Gear is outputting the correct voltage. With your multimeter, measure the voltage between VCC and ground, shown here. It should read about 5 volts. This 4.88 volt reading is within the acceptable range. If the voltage exceeds 5.45 volts, you need to recheck your work, or the Game Gear itself may need some repairs, such as replacing the capacitors, which is why it's a good idea to do that before attempting this mod. Moving our attention to the McWill driver board, solder a wire to the VCC pad and one to ground. Then slide the LCD onto the motherboard as shown here. Now solder the ground wire that we just soldered to the McWill board to pin 3 of the brightness thumb wheel, and then the other end of the VCC wire to pin 1 as shown here. Next, solder a single wire from test pad T10 to test pad T11. Now solder another wire from the point labeled FB1 to this middle pad on the McWill Kit. Solder a brand new wire from this bottom pad to the pin shown here. Next, solder another wire from pin 1 on the brightness thumb wheel to the 6th pin from the left shown here, which is our 5 volt source. Then solder another wire from the 3rd pin on the brightness thumb wheel to ground, shown here. Now we're going to solder in the wires for the button controls. Solder a new wire to the left pad on C29, another wire to the right pad on C30, and the last wire to the lower pad of C28. Then connect those wires to these corresponding pads on the McWill driver board. Now comes the hard part. We're going to solder 6 new wires to the tiny ribbon cable contacts, starting with a wire on pin 9 shown here. Solder another wire to pin 16, then pin 18, pin 20, pin 39, and lastly pin 57. And finally, solder each wire to its corresponding location to these solder pads on the McWill driver board. And of course, let's give it a quick test. Thank goodness, everything works. On the new shell, remove this top screw post. Apply the new glass screen lens. Place the 3D printed spacer into place with the old foam gasket on top. Install all the buttons and membranes. Drop in the new speaker and secure it with the included bracket. Put the motherboard in the front shell and align the LCD until you are happy with its position. Once you're happy with the LCD's position, lock it in place by making a large solder blob connecting the McWill Kit to the motherboard. I had to use a capacitor leg to help with this since I couldn't get the blob to bridge between the two PCBs. Then do the same on the other side. And this is what it should look like. Now fasten the motherboard to the front shell housing. Transfer over the power board, as well as the soundboard. Plug everything together and then button it all up. Remember to not put a screw up here because it's blocked by the new LCD, and we also removed that screw post. Load up some batteries and give it one final test. Fantastic, everything looks good. And of course, the final step. I've been wanting to do this mod for a long time, but I've always been hesitant due to the amount of modding required. But now that it's done, I'm absolutely amazed at the quality. Having played the Game Gear as a child, and even now, all I have known is the low contrast and blurry LCD, which certainly hasn't aged well. This new display is light years ahead of the outgoing screen, and I really couldn't be happier with the new one. So believe it or not, there are some inbuilt features on this kit. Let's go over them real quick. By pressing the Start, 1 and 2 buttons all together at the same time, you can scroll through 7 different video modes. I'll do my best to go over each of them. The first mode you are seeing is the default. This takes the native 160 by 144 resolution and scales it to the 320 by 240 native resolution of the actual LCD. This takes up the entire real estate of the Game Gear window and, in my opinion, looks fantastic. This is the option that I've been primarily using and is my favorite way to experience the Game Gear. Next is the same scaled image of the prior option with the addition of Scanlines. I think this looks great and it's a fun novelty, but I find that I prefer playing without the Scanlines enabled. Then you have the mode where horizontal resolution is doubled and the vertical is scaled. This doubles the Game Gear's 160 horizontal pixels to 320, which means that the horizontal resolution is scaled perfectly, while the vertical resolution is stretched. This cuts off a bit of the left and right parts of the screen. Following this is the same as the previous mode, but again with Scanlines added. Next is a true 2x integer scale of the Game Gear's resolution. It is doubled to 320 by 288, but because of the physical window of the Game Gear, the top and bottom of the image are cut off. I'm not sure why this mode was added, since in my opinion games like Sonic are sort of unplayable. The following mode is the same as the prior, except again with artificial scanlines. And lastly is the native resolution mode. This mode displays the native 160 by 144 resolution centered in the screen. This shows you how much higher of a resolution the McWill LCD has. Even though the image is small, I kinda enjoy playing it in this mode because of how sharp the image looks. Regardless, my preferred way of playing is the default mode, which is scaled to fit and fill the Game Gear window perfectly. So those are all the important features of this kit. Now moving on to how the actual kit performs, I have to say first and foremost, the image quality is fantastic. The screen's response rate is quick, and the color rendering is bright and vibrant. It is leaps and bounds better than the old LCD, which suffered from extensive ghosting and washed out colors. Again, this is something that is really difficult to show through a video camera. One really needs to see it in person in order to appreciate the quality. Now, totally unrelated to the screen is the RetroSix shell and buttons, which are really awesome. I don't want to get too much into the details of these amazing products because I'm planning on doing a separate video on all the amazing Game Gear mods that RetroSix has been producing recently. There have been a lot of them lately, so be on the lookout for that video. However, the bottom line is the shell and buttons are phenomenal. Now, getting into the downsides of the kit, I think you probably already know what I'm going to say here. This kit is very difficult to install. As you saw, there is a significant amount of desoldering of small surface-mounted components required, as well as some very fine soldering onto very small pads. I even managed to accidentally desolder a capacitor while removing one of the other components, and I also sort of melted the brightness control knob. So needless to say, while I am happy with the results, this was quite the challenge. You really should be quite comfortable with soldering in order to proceed with this mod. In reality, the whole installation of the McWill Kit took a lot of patience and time. I know the tutorial makes it look like it's a quick mod, but that's the beauty of editing. In reality, this took me a few hours to accomplish. Regardless, I'm really happy with this mod and I think it came out looking fantastic. But I'm curious about what you guys think. Do any of you think you'll pursue this mod or perhaps get an experienced modder to do it for you? How do you think the McWill Kit performs? Is the difficulty worth the payoff? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. For now, I need to package this Game Gear up and send it off to Matthew. I really hope he enjoys this renewed Game Gear for years to come. I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Macho Nacho Productions. I release content every Thursday, so be sure to turn on notifications. And as always, see you next time.